Welcome back, 365 Sports. Paul Catalina and Craig Smoak and Sam Kahn, our friend of The Athletic. And Sam, you are the techspert, but we're going to venture outside the borders of the Lone Star State for the first question. And we've been talking in the first segment about Pac12 Media Days and George Kliavkoff and his remarks today. And I would say that no matter what happens at the end of the media deal and whenever it happens, today was not a banner day for George.
I would agree with that. I think the comment of we're not gonna announce a deal on purpose because we want football to be the focus, but then being very murky about whether or not there is a deal, and then the comment about the longer we wait, the better the deal will get. It all just doesn't add up. So yeah, this was not a great day for him, and it really is unfortunate because last week we were all at Big 12 Media Days, and we got to focus mostly on the football. Certainly there were conversations and questions for Brett Yormark about expansion and all that, but we got that out of the way pretty quickly, and I feel like we were able to focus on the football, and there's a lot to be excited about the league. And when you see what came out of Pac-12 today, it just feels like there's this sense of dread, and I just don't know if that's ever going to change until a deal actually gets done. I would like it to get done quickly so we can all move on and we can know what the future is going to look like. But yeah, certainly not a great day for Pac-12.
You know, Sam, I was sitting there looking at it from the Big 12 side of things, or the folks who believe the Pac's in trouble. Like, you definitely got force-fed a bunch of fuel today that you can work with moving forward. If you're the Pac-12 side of things, I mean, I guess you heard enough to feel like nothing messaging-wise has really changed, so the status quo kind of remains, and you can convince yourself of that. But is there something you heard at least outright positively, if you're a Pac-12 person that was hoping to hear something today that you can walk away from and go, okay, that's reassuring? Or was it completely devoid of anything reassuring in your mind?
I mean, it sounds like, and I don't know if it's just specifically today, but it does sound like we're getting closer. When you hear some of the presidents and chancellors talk a little bit more on the record about this, it does sound like we're getting closer to a resolution. It certainly does seem like that, more so than it did 3-4 months ago. So, and that certainly, I think I think they would like to get this done before the season starts. Certainly, you don't want this leaking into the end. And like I said, the longer it goes, the more vulnerable you are. But I do think if we get that sense, and again, like I said, I think the thing is I think everybody eventually would like to turn their attention to football, because guess what? Pac-12 football has a chance to be pretty good this year. You look at some of the intriguing storylines across that league. You look at Oregon with Bo Nix. You look at USC, obviously, was on the cusp of playoff last year. Utah brings back Cam Rising. There's a ton of great quarterbacks in that league. A ton of great stories. And so the faster this gets done, the better, because then we can actually turn our attention to what we really like about it, which is the ball, because I think the ball in the Pac-12 has a chance to be really good this year.
Yeah, Sam, I mean, this is probably going to be a lot like, maybe even to a higher level, because there's maybe more teams that are playoff caliber than in the Big 12, where they're going to eat their own a lot throughout the season, I would think.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough sledding for the conference from top to bottom, without question. I think in some ways it may look like the Big 12 in terms of the way teams are able to knock each other off, just because of how good the talent is across the conference. And you got all these different coaches, good coaches. You look at Oregon State. And John Smith's done a really good job there, and they added DJU as a transfer. We mentioned USC, Chip Kelly at UCLA, still interesting to see how that experiment goes. Kenny Dillingham over at Arizona State, they seem to be recruiting at a really high level. They've added a lot to the roster since they've gotten there. So, and then, of course, I haven't even mentioned Dion, which, of course, everybody is fascinated by Dion and the whole experiment in Colorado with the 70-plus players they've added. So I think it's going to be a fascinating year in that conference from top to bottom.
Another thing about just the messaging today, I mean, you've been to enough press conferences involving all sorts of things. You know kind of how all of that operates. I guess it was just surprising to hear somebody who's had months and months and months of notice that you're going to have to eventually speak to the public. Didn't sound like they had necessarily this really super thought out message. What would you have maybe done differently or advised differently, or what would you have said in that position as Kliavkoff if you came to the podium knowing that the things people were going to ask about are not necessarily in hand?
Yeah, I think you just be upfront. Be like, look, here's where we are. here's what's going on, here's the situation, here's what we hope and expect, and that's it. I think it becomes difficult because you're asked questions, and so you've got to, you want to give some information without giving away everything, and I get it. But at the same time, I think you're in a tough spot, but at the same time, you want to put forth an air of confidence. You want to put forth a vision that you are a decisive leader and that you know what direction this is going, and that you have everybody's confidence from the membership in that league. And you know what? I would say this. One thing that I think we as observers, media, fans need to remember is just because you are in a powerful position and just because you are a high-ranking official does not mean that you are going to be great at every aspect of your job. And I think we even see that with head coaches. I think about the way Jimbo Fisher handled the press conference at A&M to start spring football when we all knew he was going to get asked about Bobby Petrino coming in, and it didn't seem like he had anything very well prepared to say about it, and it was all just a little bit of a mess. And so just because someone's in a powerful position doesn't necessarily mean they're great at publicly communicating what they are good at necessarily. So I think that's one thing we need. When it comes to conference commissioners, I think it's very easy for us to just give people credit and say, oh, well, they're a conference commissioner. They must be really good at this, that, and the other. Well, it doesn't mean that you're good at messaging. It doesn't mean that you're good at everything. So that part of it, certainly, I think someone could help them a little bit more on that front.
I can't wait for your hard-hitting investigative piece on who is actually going to call the plays, Sam, in College Station. And that's going to be one of the first questions after the first game. Honestly, if he's still on the same kind of path between now and then, the first thing that somebody's going to ask is like, hey, who called those plays today?
Yeah, no doubt. And the thing is, here's the thing. Do we all really believe that Bobby Petrino left UNLV and accepted an offensive coordinator job under Jimbo Fisher to not call plays?
Absolutely not.
I don't.
Yeah.
Of course not. Of course not. And so, and even in a roundabout way, multiple times, even in the spring press conference, even at SEC Media Days, eventually Jimbo kind of got around to the fact that, yeah, Petrino's going to run the offense. And so the thing that boggles my mind about that, it's not who will run the offense. It's why is it so hard for Jimbo, again, to just come out clearly and say, hey, look, this is the decision I made. This is the way we're going. I think this is what's best for our program. But I think it's an ego thing because, again, I've mentioned this before. The guy won a national championship running an offense and calling plays as the head coach 10 years ago. He reached the very top of the sport doing that. And now people are questioning whether or not he can still do that. And I think that just eats at his ego. And I think it drives him batty. And the fact that he has to answer our questions or critics or people who don't know anything that about football or as much football as he has, certainly he's forgotten more football than I'll ever know from a scheme standpoint. But the fact that he has to sit and answer those questions, I think it just eats at him and it drives him nuts. And for whatever reason, it creates this circle where he continues to answer the questions the same way rather than just coming out and saying, hey, look, yeah, I hired Bobby Petrino, and yeah, I'm going to let him call the plays. But yes, I'm also going to still have involvement in the offense because this is what we need to do to win. But it seems like he can't bring himself to do that, and I just can't understand why.
Yeah, you should say, yeah, that's what I did. It's going to be awesome. Like, I believe it's going to work out great. I'm thrilled for this. It's a lot less stress on me. Whatever he can say, and then people would stop asking because he would have actually directly answered the question. Sam, NIL legislation, I mean, look, it's probably still further off than we can even fathom, but there was a bipartisan bill introduced in the Senate a couple of days ago. The A5 conferences seem to be all for it. I don't know how much you've gotten to dive into it, but there seem to be some good things in the bill and then some things to me like creating a government agency to monitor this that I'm not totally wild about.
Yeah, I will start with this. I do like that there is a lot of protections for the players. That to me in any NIL legislation has to be at the forefront because the one thing I don't want to see us do is see us go backwards in terms of restricting athletes more than they have, because I think we lived in a college football space for so long where there were so many restrictions, and should we have all let them all off at the same time, at one time in the sport? Maybe not. Maybe we should have doled that out a little bit more deliberately, but that's on the NCAA for not being a little bit more proactive and just kicking the can down the road and hoping that somebody was going to save them from having to do this. And that's why we ended up in this mess. But the fact that it is a bipartisan bill, I will say the fact that we've gotten this far is surprising because I really had little hope for them to get any kind of congressional action on this, and we'll see how far this goes. But I do think it's important to have some uniformity across the sport, because if you're going to have 133 schools in FBS competing in the sport, and ostensibly all of them having a chance at the college football playoff, via those 6 conference championship bids, then you need to have some uniformity in how you recruit players. And I know it's part of recruiting, whether we like to admit it or not, whether the NCAA wants to admit it or not, and they say it's not supposed to be recruiting inducement, it is. This is just part of the deal. And so we have some uniformity on how that's done, and we have some uniformity on how it's done in conjunction with the portal. And we also have some protections for these athletes, because it's not just the NIL part, it's also protecting the athletes, because when they go jump in the portal and they think they're going to get a deal, and they end up not getting a deal that they thought were going to when they first jumped in the portal, and they gave in on bad information, that's a bad situation. Or if they have representation that's not fully vetted, or maybe this person is an NIL agent and they don't have the proper agency background that they should, that's a problem for that athlete and the people around him. So I think establish some of these norms and some of these regulations, I think, would be helpful. And also, like I said, just having some uniformity would help. But certainly, I think we're a long way from getting to any point where this is at an endpoint.
Yeah, that'd be nice to have an end game in sight, but obviously it's a complicated matter. It would be nice, though, like you said, to have some balance, not just tilted one way or the other. And I feel like we've gone extreme one way to extreme the other way in some ways, and some middle ground would be A-okay with me. Sam, kind of going back to somewhat Kliavkoff, he was asked about expansion. You are the techspert, and obviously SMU has been mentioned quite often as a possible candidate for the Pac-12. Just what's your understanding on kind of how they are sitting around at the moment? Obviously, they got a lot of good things going on with Rhett Lashley, a lot of excitement, but any idea or insight into how SMU is sort of having to, I guess, patiently wait for any potential outcome here?
Yeah, it's just a waiting game for them at this point. And honestly, I think SMU is in a win-win spot right now, because if you get the invitation to the Pac-12, then you get the membership in a Power 5 conference. You get the money that comes with that, which will be a substantial increase. I think they get between $7 and $10 million a year from their current media rights deal. In the Pac-12 deal, you would expect that would probably at least triple, maybe quadruple, depending on what they end up with. So that's a big plus for SMU if that ends up happening. If it doesn't happen and they end up staying in the American, from a football standpoint, I still think they're in a great spot, because you look at what they've done from a roster standpoint, you look at what they've done from a facility standpoint, NIL, their donor base is very invigorated. They don't lack for anything. You look at that end zone facility they're putting at the Indoor Stadium right now. When that thing is finished, it's going to be beautiful. The NIL is really good right now over there. It's certainly one of the best in the group of 5. And so that puts them in position to be a contender year in and year out for a college football playoff berth, because there's no reason with their talent level, when you look at the makeup of the American Athletic Conference, there's no reason why they shouldn't win that conference fairly consistently moving forward. And then if they're able to do that, if you're going to win the American, you're going to be in the mix for that 6 automatic conference champion bid in the 12-team playoff. And so you're getting in the playoff on a consistent basis, you essentially could become a modern-day Boise State, what Boise State was 15 years ago, a team that is kind of in the mix for one of those automatic bids every year. And that is a really good spot to be, because if you're not going to be able to play in one of those major conferences, that's the next best thing, is getting able to get in that tournament and win at a high level. So I think regardless of what happens with SMU, with the Pac-12, I think they're in a good spot.
Final thing for me, Sam, Big 12 Media Days obviously has been a few days now, but you were around there, and it was a pretty productive, I think, 2 days for everybody that was there. It wasn't necessarily like a bunch of buzzworthy news, because that was kind of last year's event more so than anything, but you've been around to see the way this thing has all ebbed and flowed. What were your thoughts leaving Arlington and Big 12 Media Days about just kind of the state of things for the Big 12 Conference at the moment?
Yeah, I think you have to feel good about this year, and I think you have to feel good about the future. I think they're on really solid footing as it sits right now, certainly with the TV deal done and locked in for the next 5-6 years. I think that's a really good spot to be in, number one. But number two, the football is going to be fun, man. This year is going to be a one-of-a-kind year with Texas and Oklahoma still in it, with 4 new schools coming in. And then after this, it's going to be fascinating to see who emerges as the power. I'm fascinated to see Kansas State. Can they go back-to-back this year? And can they stay on the trajectory that they seem to be on under Chris Klieman? Texas Tech, there seems to be so much buzz around that program with Joey McGuire and them. TCU obviously went to the playoff last year. Can they still be a really good team? And can they sustain this and get back to a place where they were a decade ago or further back, where they were winning 10 games on an annual basis? And so we talk about Baylor. This is such a big year for Baylor and Dave Aranda. I think there's so much to appreciate about football and the competitiveness in this league. And this year I think I saw Spencer Hall yesterday call it the Big 12 is the longest continuous bar fight in college football. I think that's the best way to put it. And you just added a few more players into that fight with the 4 new schools. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch. And I think it's going to be so unpredictable. And watching who that next power is going to be once Texas and OU leave, who takes control of the conference, is going to be a fascinating battle to watch.
Sam Kahn, the Techspert from The Athletic. Sam, always great to talk to you. We'll talk to you again soon. Thanks for hopping on.
Thanks. You take care.
Sam Kahn. Always love talking to Sam. Really, really great.